Well, hello everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, nighttime, any other parts of the day, wherever you may be. Thanks so much for joining us, wherever you may be across the world. Joining us live for Serverless Office Hours, streaming on the AWS Twitch channel, on our YouTube Serverless LAN channel, and also via LinkedIn Live. My name is Julian Wood. I'm a developer advocate for the Serverless team at AWS, and I'm joined by two amazing, very well orchestrated people. We've got Cory McBain, who's a product manager for Step Functions. How on earth are you today, Cory?
I am doing well, and I just have to add a disclaimer. I'm at least 67% nicer in person than my picture portends. So, hello everyone, and welcome to our discussion.
No judging. If you're gonna, take mugshot photos, that's quite all right. I don't look anything like my photo anymore either, so I'm an imposter as well. So, yeah, Cory, welcome to Office Hours. This is your second time. I know the first time it was proper baptism by fire. You just joined the company. So, for people who don't know you, what's sort of your journey to AWS and most importantly, Step Functions?
That's a great question. I was actually a customer of Step Functions at my previous gig, and we had done a massive kind of monolith reduction into serverless. And through my journey in that company, I found that Step Functions was the lowest drama service we had for the entire thing. It was really well orchestrated, and everything just kind of worked. So when the Step Functions team reached out, I was happy to join, and I really wanted to get a sense of scale and responsibility and kind of really into the more broad use cases that our developers and customers kind of experience day to day. I find that super fascinating. So it was an easy decision to make my journey here. But I've been in product for longer than I care to admit, over 15 years, and happy to be here.
Cool, excellent, great to have you. And also we've got a software guru, Shiv Lakshminarayan. Shiv, you're also, I know, based in Vancouver with the rest of the Step Functions team. What's your journey to AWS? And you like the proper coder who makes all the stuff work. So good kudos to you.
Absolutely. I've transitioned into a management role now, but I have been at Amazon for almost 10 years. Started out, and the bulk of that 10 years has been as a software development engineer. I switched over to Builder Tools about 2 years into my time at Amazon. I had initially started in retail, but I just love automation tools and empowering developer productivity. And so as part of that journey, I was on the AWS CDK team, where I was writing the L2 higher level constructs for Step Functions. And I loved the service so much that I joined the Step Functions team.
Well, there we go.
How I ended up here.
So you were in CDK writing the CDK orchestrator for the orchestrator, and you were like, hang on, this is another level of inception. Let's just move over. Love it. Excellent. Well, we will be back very shortly with Shiv and Cory to talk about all things Step Functions. But just looking back over the past week of serverless, actually, before I do switch over there, I will just say, and I know one of our comments said, yeah, that X logo, it just sounds weird. That took me ages. And obviously, it's a brand new thing. You can't even find a transparent logo on the internet. So thanks. Product managers everywhere must be going, oh my word, what happened? All of our branding's gone. But anyway, we have an X. We have to be latest and current, I suppose. But looking back over the past week of serverless, last week on the stream on the 25th of July, a third-party tool by our friendly people at Fourth Theorem called Slickwatch. This is really interesting because it was just a client-side tool that you run on your serverless applications and builds up a huge amount of dashboards and automatic metrics for things like Lambda functions and I believe Step Functions and API Gateway and Event Bridge and a whole bunch of different tools, different services. Really easy to set up. And so Darren and Luciano had a really good show of just adding better observability, which is always helpful in my book. That is on our YouTube Serverless LAN channel, along with all other Serverless Office Hours episodes. So there's years of content out there. So if you are joining us for the first time, welcome. Or recently, there's a whole back catalog of super interesting things to look at. What's new in the world of AWS serverless? Well, 3 down is Lambda adds support for Python 3.11. I appreciate some people were getting some antsy that things were taking a bit longer. Well, we've had 3.10 this year and 3.11 this year. So the releases are picking up and super happy to see that. Lots of cool sort of different interesting things literally as part of Python. And then, some sort of Lambda magic that we sprinkle on it as well. If you're a Lambda Power Tools user, that also supports Python 3.11 out the box. So that's a whole bunch of cool utilities to just make your life much easier for Lambda. The one on the top is interesting, SQS, preview of JSON protocol support for SQS. This was one where I just scratched my head and goes, we don't have JSON protocol support for SQS because when you just use the SDK, the things just happen. But SQS being one of our very first services, is super old. And it was amazing. And my mind's gone blank to try and think of what the previous protocol, well, the existing protocol support is. But the JSON protocol support makes things much faster and lower latency. So how about that? Some cool new innovation with SQS. You learn new things every day, which is a cool part of this job. Some compute blog posts about general things such as Python 3.11 runtime and Lambda and all the cool different things. The second one down is actually migrating functions written in Go from the Go runtime to the custom runtime. And this has caused a sort of lot of interest, and some people are trying to understand what this is. Lambda is certainly not moving away from Go at all. But because Go is a package runtime that is compiled, there's actually no need to have a managed runtime for it, because what do you need to do? You need to compile everything to a binary, and you may as well just run it on the custom runtime. There's a whole bunch of tooling to make this really easy. It's not just Go, it's also Rust and other kind of things. So if you're using a compiled language, using the custom runtime is awesome, because you're still getting all the patching from the runtime and the operating system, and it's all running nicely on Amazon Linux 2. The Go runtime, just for historic purposes, was running on Amazon Linux 1. So there was a migration step that's going to happen anyway. So we'll just make it a little bit better and easier for you. And tooling will always continue to improve. We love Go at Lambda and AWS. So this actually makes it a little bit better, a little bit faster, a little bit more understandable to reason about. And then third one down, because we are talking about step functions today, Madhav has written a really cool blog post about implementing patterns that exit early out of parallel states. One of the cool things about step functions, you can run things in parallel, but when one of the little parallel states needs to jump out of its little steps, well, that was a really good blog post to explain all about that. Now, October the 26th, Event-Driven Architectures Day in Nashville. It was in London last year, was super duper successful, super useful, interesting talks that are going to be happening. So in person in Nashville on October the 26th, I would suggest getting your tickets as soon as possible, because they are going thick and fast. So that's going to be a super interesting day. Lots of talks, workshops, just interesting information all about event-driven architectures, which covers a lot of what step functions and EventBridge does. Also, the serverlessland.com for all things to do with serverless and AWS has a new learning page, which we put together. Lots of interesting information. Quick punt on something I've got is if you're learning about Lambda, I've done a 23-part video series, just Lambda fundamentals from the very beginning, what serverless is, what Lambda is. So lots of information. Then also, even yesterday, because it's step functions today, they released a distributed data processing learning path with step functions, and Uma Ramadas and Adam Wagner, who are proper experts in all of these things, have written a really useful guide, just sort of, from an introduction to distributed data processing. And this is a really cool use case, I certainly think, for step functions. If you're thinking of the sort of map reduce kind of world, you'd be surprised how helpful step functions can do and how quickly it can scale out and how performant it can be. But talking about a lot of step functions, but step functions today, we're going to be talking all about versions and aliases. So just initially over to you, Cory. Step functions has been around for a while. What are versions and aliases, and why have we brought this? Why have we brought this out now?
Awesome. Let's pop up the slide and let's get to it and talk about it. So again, Cory on the Step Functions team, Senior PM, Shiv and I are here to talk about versions and aliases. And before Shiv introduces himself and gets on with the demo, showing us how it works, it's a great question, Julian. Like, why are they important? Why do we do it? So let's just get me to the actual slide. On June 22nd of this year, we released versions and aliases, and it's basically to support continuous deployment for step functions workflows. So you can iterate faster and release more safely into production. With it, you can, instead of maintaining multiple workflows to track your changes, you can maintain multiple versions for a single workflow. Publish those versions when you're ready to do it, and then create aliases that route traffic between them to kind of implement continuous deployment. So this allows versions and aliases allows traffic to be shifted at the orchestration layer rather than on individual resources, and that enables you to set up blue-green deployments. Where the existing state machine version is in production, we call that the blue version, and a newly deployed state machine, the new version, is called the green version. And the blue version is, deployed to production and runs normally, while the newer green version can be tested separately without users seeing it. So once that green version is validated and tested, we can use it in production, and it becomes the new blue version. Versions and aliases also supports canary or linear or gradual style deployments as well. And with canary deployments, we can configure the production split alias, just for example, the split traffic. So let's say we would route 90% of the requests to the existing version and 10% of the requests to the new version. And if we see that there's no resulting increase in failures, we can adjust the alias to direct 100% or a gradual amount of that to the new version. And on failure, if we're seeing failure on the new version, we can revert the alias to send 100% of the requests to the earlier version. And on that gradual deployment theme, we also include support for managed traffic shifting that includes automated rollback when errors occur. So Shiv's going to talk about that shortly. Also, we are supporting CloudFormation SAM, CDK, Terraform out of the box. And to get you started with gradual deployments in third-party tooling, we're including reference designs for Spinnaker, Jenkins, and others. So now, without further ado, I'd like to pass the mic to Shiv, and he's going to take us through how all of this works together.
Yep.
Cool.
Thanks for that intro, Cory. So I'm going to go pop into the AWS Step Functions console to essentially we're going to create a new state machine, and I'm on the state machine Step Functions console page, and we're going to use the workflow designer, which is a lovely way to create your state machine. So since we're focusing on showing off the concepts of versioning, aliasing, and how you interact with it in the console, I'll be creating a relatively simple state machine. So we'll just give it a pass state, which is just a state that will act as a placeholder, and it's going to simply pass. And so we'll be able to configure this. I'll go ahead and click next, and we just have a single pass state. It doesn't matter what input is passed, it will just succeed. So we're going to go ahead and create that. And here we'll call it our hello serverless. And these are our state machine creation options. And the ones that the option that I'd like to highlight here is publish version on creation. So versions are optional. So every revision and edit that you make to a state machine definition results in a state machine revision being created. You may or may not choose to publish a version from that, but on creation, you can tick that box. And when you create your state machine, you'll end up a state machine with a state machine that has a version and a V1. So to get to versions, on your state machine landing page, you click on the versions tab, and you get a nice little graphic here that shows how state machine versions work. So it's an immutable snapshot. So every time you change your definition and save it, a new revision is created. And from that revision, you may choose to publish. So when we tick that box, we essentially said we want to create state machine version 1. And so here, if we were to click on that version itself, it takes us into the version specific page where we can now start executions. And if we were to just start an execution, it will start with version 1, and we just take that off. And essentially that has now executed a state machine execution against that specific version. And when we go here, we can see that in our main landing page for the state machine, you can see all of the executions that have been that have run either successfully or not. And you can see that version 1 is what you can now filter by. And so one of the capabilities that versioning enables is the auditability and traceability of, well, which executions ran with which version of a state machine. So that then leads us into aliases, and aliases are a pointer that routes traffic from one version or up to 2 for enabling the blue-green canary rolling deployments that Cory alluded to. So we're going to go ahead and just create a version, or an alias rather, called prod. And we are going to map that to version 1. Since there isn't 2 versions, this split traffic between 2 versions option is grayed out. So we're going to just go ahead and create that alias. And you can also start an execution against an alias. And when you start that, it also runs successfully. If we go back to the state machine landing page, you can see that it was executed with version 1 and alias prod. And the reason it was executed with version 1 is because 100% of the traffic to that alias is essentially going to that state machine. So I'm going to just quickly copy the state machine ARN and show off how we would call this from the CLI using Cloud Shell, which is a nice handy way to make a state machine execution call. So we have three types of ARNs. So if you were to call the state machine start execution API against this state machine with no qualifier, it would start an unversioned latest revision, whatever you've saved in the definition, regardless of whether it has a version or not. So if we refresh that, you'd see that it has no version or alias. And
so
if you
that was just the ARN with nothing at the end of it, because I appreciate with the Cloud Shell it's a bit small on the screen, so I need to for us older people in the back who can't read as well.
Got it. Yes, it is what we call the unqualified ARN. It has it's exactly what you see here in the details page that I'm highlighting. So if you were to call that same API and then suffix it with the version number, so :1, that would now execute the state machine against version 1. And so you'd see that we just ran version 1. You can also now reference the alias, which we called prod. So the suffix there, the qualified alias ARN would be :prod. And so if we run that, we get a successful execution, and we refresh that, and we have version 1 and alias prod. So now what happens? So as you start with your state machine, it is initially a representation of your workflow, but over time, you're going to want to edit that workflow, and you're going to want to create additional logic. So we want to go edit our workflow and essentially start producing V2. And so here, we're going to just call this past state. We're going to give it some output. Let's create a field called version, and we're going to call it 2. And so this is the same past state. It just now produces an output that says version 2. And we like what that state machine now looks like. So we're going to save it. So when you save it, it doesn't automatically create a new version. So if you go back to your versions page, you will see that you actually have to publish a new version because your revisions might be intermediate work as you're building out your workflow.
Yeah.
So if we go ahead and
just to make that simpler, you can publish when Shiv saved the state machine in place. You can publish from that screen as well, but it's nice to be able to do it from the versions screen too, because if you're in context of versions or in context of your state machine, you're able to publish from anywhere.
That's actually really, I actually really like that feature that you, as you said, when you are doing, lots of different little versions, you're not actually automatically creating a version each one, which you've got to go and tidy up. You can be a bit more explicit about the exact versions you need. Don't need version sprawl.
Exactly. So now I have gone and created version 2. And so here you can also click on your drop downs to go back to another version. But here we can see we've saved V2 and it has a result and it produces some extra output that version 1 did not. So if we were to go back to version 1 and look at its definition, you see that it doesn't have that. So now we have a V2. And so how would we call V2 in our Cloud Shell? We can just suffix the 2 in order to address the version. And you'd be able to see that we ran V2. And if you were to click in on that execution, you can see that that output that we added is now here. So now we have 2 versions, but we don't want to necessarily always have to suffix the version in order to start an execution of that state machine. We want to use aliases in order to shift traffic. And so the way we would do that here is we would go into the routing configuration tab of the alias details page, and we would want to edit that. So we start splitting traffic between the 2 versions. So we want half of our traffic to go to V1 and half of our traffic to go to V2. But this is essentially a building block that I'll build up to in terms of how we want to do gradual deployments or linear canary deployments. So I've just saved the alias, and we can see that the routing configuration now sends 50% of the traffic to V1 and 50% of the traffic to V2. So if we were to now go back to our Cloud Shell and reference the alias itself, it has a 50% chance of calling V1 and a 50% chance of calling V2. And so we can see that it just ran against V1. And so I'm just going to run it a bunch of times just to show that traffic will end up in both versions. So when I give this one a refresh, you'll see some of the traffic went to V2 and some of it went to V1. And all we did here was we addressed or started an execution against the alias, which is splitting the traffic between the two versions. And where we would want to use this in practice is to make sure that V2 is safe, which we have just developed, whereas V1 was serving prod. You want to make that update, but you want to do it in a safe manner. So you want to make sure that your executions are actually succeeding as you're going through that.
So in a sort of safe deployment example, I mean, we're doing 50-50 to show it, but, you know, you would, if it's a very busy state machine, if you just start with 1% or something, just check that kind of traffic. Is that the kind of safer deployment mechanism of it, that you can get a bit more confidence that your state machine is going to be working?
Absolutely. You would not want to start with 50% of your traffic going to something that you haven't tested and verified is safe. So I was showing that from a manual perspective, but you ideally want to automate all of this and have it as infrastructure as code. So as you start from your beginner of your developer journey and you move down the maturity continuum, you get to a point where you want to use CI/CD, you want to use automated rollbacks, and you want your infrastructure as code. So that will lead me into the next part of my demo, which will be, I will flip into VS Code. One of our senior engineers put together a handy little run book that I can share in order to demonstrate traffic shifting and how we do that through CloudFormation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my Visual Studio Code screen. Is that visible?
Yeah,
yes.
We're back up it.
Awesome. So what this is going to do is demonstrate gradual deployments and rollbacks of state machines through versions and aliases. So we have here an initial template, which I'll talk about real quick. We're creating a few, so this is a CloudFormation template. So we're using native CloudFormation for the rest of this demo. But essentially what we are doing here is we're creating a state machine that's representative of, similar to the past state that we just created manually. And it's creating a result that says V1, so that will be part of the output. And we're creating two new resources that we've made available, state machine version and state machine alias. So state machine version has two properties, state machine ARN and state machine revision ID. These are both properties that are now available from the state machine, so they're directly tied to this state machine. So every time you update this, since this state machine version is dependent on it, it'll automatically be updated. And then we also create a state machine alias, and we call it prod. And our deployment preference here is all at once. So I'll talk about a couple of the deployment preferences as we go through further into the demo. But all at once essentially means a complete big bang deployment. 100% of your traffic goes to this new alias. So we're going to go ahead and run this, which is just a CLI command to do CloudFormation deploy. And it's going to deploy that template that we just looked at. And what that's going to do now is kick off a CloudFormation deployment. I'm going to flip back to the console real quick to show what it looks like from the console as we start to deploy that out.
I do love watching the Jupyter notebooks. Whenever I first saw that, it was actually the first time I saw Jupyter notebooks was at an AWS workshop at reInvent many years ago, and I hadn't seen them before, and I was just like, that is so cool. You have all your instructions and all your code and your deployment in one place. Bring it on.
we use it quite a bit. It's really, really handy to call CLI commands and run our tests in a repeatable manner. So here was the stack that we just created a moment ago. We can take a look at the template. It's the same template that we just went over. And you'll notice that it creates a bunch of resources, including a new state machine, an alias, and a version. And so if we click on that state machine, this is not the one that we manually created, but one that was created through CloudFormation. It has a definition, it has a start, a hello world, and it returns a result of version 1. So now what do we do? So we want to demonstrate that we want to now, so this is also mapped to an alias. 100% of the traffic goes to the prod alias. But now we want to essentially create V2 of the app and demonstrate what a gradual deployment looks like. So I'm going to pop back over to the Jupyter notebook and continue on with our steps. So console links to monitor progress, we can skip that because we just did that. but I will run it anyways, just in case. But these are just some handy links in order to monitor the CloudFormation progress and the state machine that we just looked at. So having said that, let's go to generate traffic against the alias. So what we want to do is we continuously send traffic to show how traffic is shifting as we create a new version. So what this does, this command here that I'm going to run, is creating an alias arn variable within my bash terminal. And then this command here is essentially calling start execution against the alias, which is prod, every 5 seconds. So every 5 seconds, we should see a new execution pop up for this state machine. And then in my terminal, I'm just going to run that. It's going to keep showing the execution arns for that state machine as we do it. So this is now sort of simulating a live system where you have a V1 that's serving production traffic. And now we want to safely deploy V2. And so let's take a quick look at what our V2 template looks like. And there are some changes in here. So you'll notice that there's a deployment preference option here. And we have chosen a linear deployment, which essentially means you start at this percentage and you increment by the percentage that was specified every minute. And so these are in minutes. So essentially, after the first minute, you'll be at 50% going to this new version. And after the second minute, you'll be 100% going to this new. We have not hooked into any rollback alarms. That'll be the next step. But we are now changing our state machine definition to create a second version, which is version 2. So since we've changed this definition, a new version will be created as these properties are dependent on the state machine. And now we're just going to call CloudFormation again in order to deploy V2. And in deploying V2, we're also setting some new rules on our alias to say 50% of the traffic needs to be shifted over. So let's go ahead and run that. And I can pop right back to the CloudFormation console and show you.
Yeah, while Shiv moving over, just remember we are live, so send us your questions, your comments. In fact, we do have one from Velson4. Thanks for joining us via Twitch. Really looking forward to traffic shifting as we're watching now. Do you plan to add hooks mechanism to run a testing Lambda function before starting the shift with CDK and SAM?
I'll let Cory feel that as I'm going right into it.
I'm no plans at the moment, but we're happy to dive a little bit further into that offline,
cool.
If you like.
Yeah, let us know what you'd like to see.
Yes, please.
Absolutely. So we are now running a CloudFormation update. So you can see that our alias is now being updated with our new rules. So when we started off that CloudFormation deploy, we updated our state machine definition to include V2, and then that's now updating the alias. And we're also seeing continuous traffic come through on this state machine, which should be happening every 5 seconds.
Yeah, just thanks also for joining us. Cheese ball for you. I like a good cheese ball. So for clarity, you are updating the existing CloudFormation stack with a new version CloudFormation.
That's correct.
What we're doing, Shiv. Cool, excellent. Yeah, Shiv, just to let you know, your microphone has got a bit scratchy. We can hear you, but yeah, I don't think there's anything you can do, but if you can, then awesome. And yeah, thanks, Alex S, for joining us via YouTube. This is great and useful update to state functions. Thank you for permanently improving. Well, we love to hear that. Anything else, let us know.
I just noticed that my script to start executions is not really doing its job, so I'm just going to rerun that so that it actually sends traffic every 5 seconds.
There you can see we live. You see we did pray to the demo gods, but they were doing well, but you know, some things don't always work live, so
yeah,
it's all good. It's all good.
I might just even manually simulate it. So we just start some executions. And you'll notice that we have just gone from V1 to V2. So the aliases has now shifted over from 50% over to 100% V2. And all subsequent executions will go directly to V2. So I actually created a new execution and I started it against the latest revision rather than the alias, and so you'll notice that that actually didn't come up the way that we would expect it to.
Shiv, just your microphone is going quite crazy. I don't know if you've got anything else running on your laptop, or you're running all of step functions on your for the globe on your laptop. But
actually, I think it is Visual Studio Code that is interrupting my
maybe.
So I have one
the
final
Jupyter notebooks going to Jupyter or something.
Yeah, I will do one final thing. It might actually be my script. I'll switch that over. Let me know if that audio is better. I'm just switching over to a different. Okay.
Yeah, we're back.
Better.
Okay. Sorry about that.
That's
so
what happens.
Final part of my demo here is to demonstrate what rollbacks look like. And so I'm going to go back to our Visual Studio Code and run the final part, which is we're going to now update the stack with a bad change intentionally. So instead of our pass state, what we are going to add is a fail state. And a fail state is essentially going to automatically fail your state machine. So we're going to create V3, which simulates a code change that you wouldn't want going out into production. And so for that reason, we're going to create a CloudWatch alarm and demonstrate what a rollback looks like, where we're going to try to shift from V2 to V3. V3 is going to fail, and we're going to fall back to V2 because that was the safe deployment, and you don't want to release V3 to customers.
So I suppose that brings up the question of handling failures in your state machine. When you are using versions and aliases, you are going to then need to be, a bit more specific about capturing those failures and dealing within them within the state machine. So ultimately, the state machine is going to exit clearly, rather than just having an ugly fail, even though a whole bunch of steps may have already happened.
Exactly.
Which is good software to practice it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Just calling it out because, you need to think about these things.
No, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of considerations when it comes to deployment strategy, what the ideal one is. In this case, the other change that I want to highlight here is we're changing the interval to 5. So it's going to take 5 minutes before it goes from 50 to 100. So essentially, we want to give it enough time that the CloudWatch alarm that we're creating, which is going to monitor for failed executions of our state machine, can trigger a rollback in time. So I'm going to just go ahead and start that update. I might need to make sure that I actually run traffic so that it rolls back successfully. So I'm going to go ahead and update that and go back into the CloudFormation console and fix my script in the meantime. Is the mic better, by the way?
It's starting to get a little distorted again.
Okay, I think it's when I'm running commands from VS Code, unfortunately.
It's diverting power from your audio system.
So here we are updating our state machine with our bag change. And what I will be doing in the meantime is making sure that I am routing traffic to the state machine.
So I suppose another consideration as well when we are, because previously when people are building state machines and there wasn't versions and aliases, people had to be pretty confident that their new state machine was going to work in production, which obviously had a risk. But I suppose the other side of it is because the state machine has got a whole lot of coordination and orchestration in it, you do have workflows and patterns that are going to run. So maybe you're writing something to a database, or are you making an API call or reading something or changing some data. And then if your state machine is then going to fail further on, you're going to need to unpick that explicitly within your state machine because this is running in production, and you're going to have to, unpick the work that you've done, which a workflow orchestrator is perfect at doing. You've now got better options that you need to think more clearly about, recovering from failed test runs of your state machine in production.
Yeah,
that sounded like a mouthful.
It's one way to think about it for sure. But we're also considering, with versions, we saw some use cases where a customer would create a duplicate version of that state machine that they would then work in, that would be in some sort of safe environment that they would run executions. And then there would be, multiple versions managed that way, increasing your state machine count, increasing your complexity, your cost, all of that. So that's what I think that's one of the greatest value propositions of versioning itself, is because now you have one state machine, multiple versions, and then you can decide which version of that you want to run anytime.
Absolutely. And I popped over to the CloudWatch alarm that we created, which is monitoring for state machine execution failures. And we'll notice that we have a bunch of failures. So we expect this CloudWatch alarm to fire into alarm, which will then trigger a rollback in CloudFormation and go back from V3, which is now starting to accumulate some failed executions in our state machine, back to V2. So you'll notice that our alias is still routing traffic to 50. And so as these failures occur, so this is why you don't want to do 50%, but as you start to accumulate failures than expected, you want to then trigger a rollback. So here we see that our CloudWatch alarm is now popped into alarm, which will then trigger a rollback in the CloudFormation stack itself, which is... Yeah.
Can you cancel whatever's running in your VS Code right now? Your static is getting pretty...
Okay, I just stopped it. So, is that better?
No.
No, not yet.
Okay.
Give you a minute.
It is probably just my laptop.
Okay. Okay. How about now?
All right, let's give it a try.
Yay.
Great. So since that CloudWatch alarm went into alarm from all of those failed executions, that now triggers a CloudFormation rollback. And what we will end up with is an alias that is going back to its original configuration of 100% of the traffic to V2. And as you can see, we accumulated all of these failures on V3. We tried to deploy V3. It triggered an alarm because we started to see executions fail. So it automatically rolled back to V2 from CloudFormation. Yeah.
And also just to reiterate, what I love about step functions is the visual aspect of it, that you're looking at all the executions in the console. You can immediately see the failed ones. You're not having to dive through, many log groups or that kind of thing to find kind of things. Of course you can, but yeah, this is just such a lovely developer experience, I think, where you can, you want to iterate quickly, make sure things are working. You can imagine if you've even got operators that are looking at this, they maybe not, not hardcore coders creating your state machines. People can really look at your executions and know what's going on. It's so easy to look at the input and outputs. Yeah, love the developer experience.
And yeah, some of that auditability and traceability that you're alluding to, we can quickly filter and see how many bad executions did that third version result in, and then take the necessary corrective actions for any negative impact that might have had.
Oh, that's one thing I was also thinking. Is this for standard workflows or express workflows, or for both, or is there a difference between the two different types?
Easy answers.
Yes, both.
Okay, good.
Oh, yes.
Perfect. Even better.
Yeah, that was the last part of my demo, so I don't think my audio will cut out anymore. I do believe it's the screen sharing.
Idea. So yeah, no, that's excellent. I like the sort of visual flow of it as well. Even the little diagrams showing when you're sort of jumping off into a version. I hope people sort of do understand that the difference between the versions and the aliases. Think of your version as your underlying different versions of kind of things. Then your alias is a more sort of flexible construct that you can move between different versions as you are progressing through your life cycle.
Absolutely. And I'll make that example available on GitHub as well for anyone who wants to try along.
I think I actually have the link. I'll post that as soon as I can spot it. Yeah.
Just so I don't want to let it slip, all you Terraform users, we did include the versioning updates to the step functions Terraform provider, so you can use all of this stuff in Terraform as well.
Excellent. So if we sort of, after seeing it all sort of in action, which I really liked, obviously the obvious use case is, yes, you just want to deploy things in production and you want to do things safely. How would you then encourage people to think about their step functions development and their sort of workflow, even from when they're starting, even if it's just general tips and tricks to be able to get the most out of step functions and, use it as successfully as possible as they develop and grow their application?
I think the easy answer for that is to start with Workflow Studio, because that just enables you to kind of visually kind of prototype, proof of concept, anything that you're trying to work on in step functions. And it's a really easy way to collaborate as well, given you have console access and all of that. Easy way to collaborate, show your work, and kind of really quickly adjust your input outputs in a visual way. I think the easy way to get started there is with that. And then with versions, you're also insulating yourself. You can either choose to publish it or not. It's either there or it's not. That's my tips and tricks.
And even with the Workflow Studio, I love the visual aspect of it. And I mean, I'll be the first to honestly admit, AWS isn't exceptionally known for its unbelievable GUI kind of stuff. And so when the Step Functions team has come out with Workflow Studio, it really does look amazing and is an incredible way to visualize things. Personally, I'm a visual person, so I love the way I can just view my state machines and see that. And the other aspect I always like to tell people is this isn't just for your builders or your developers or people putting together state machines. These state machines can be shared with your operation, with your business people and your operations people. Yep. So some business analyst has come to you with a gnarly problem to solve. You've built a state machine and you can literally show them on the screen, well, is this what you experienced? Are these the failure modes that would happen? We branching out into choice states or parallel states. Does this make sense? And literally, rather than walking through, code, JSON, YAML, ASL to try and pick it all apart, you can literally look in a visual canvas. And yeah, I've sat with business people who are like, oh wow, I'm actually their creativity has come to life in the code, and they can see it. So it's another tip to share the step functions Workflow Studio goodness.
Yep, we're pretty fiercely proud of it.
So once people have their step functions initially created in Workflow Studio, sort of went on from there. Would they continue as is, exporting it to a infrastructure as code? What are the sort of different paths that people can think of?
I think that's the next logical path, is to get into once you've kind of made the concept known and you've got kind of agreement on that, then it's time to author it. So getting that into a codeful state, moving that into infrastructure as code is the logical next step, and that's kind of where the CloudFormation, Terraform, all of that capability comes to bear. And I think that's why we focus so directly on that support with what we've done with versions and aliases, because that is the next logical step, to turn that into functional code that is part of your repositories and part of your CI/CD plan, if it's there, if you have one, which most of us do. Yeah, that's the next kind of logical step. Now, getting the export and getting that to work right now, you can do it, but it's we're working on refining that whole experience as we speak. So I don't want to publicize the roadmap, but look for that soon.
I'll add to that. I like to
your microphone has also gone haywire again. I don't know if there's anything to close, but
close something.
I am not sure.
If not, we'll just bumble on. We'll work it out.
Nope.
Oh, I think now you're on mute.
Now you're completely out. Unmute. Nope.
No microphone's good.
You changed your audio system, and I think the StreamYard.
The gremlins are inhabiting Shiv today. We prayed to the demo gods, but my sacrifice was obviously not good enough today. But at least we had the benefit of all the really good content as well. So yeah, when you do come back, Shiv,
I would direct folks here to kind of check out that blog post, check out the GitHub repo. The blog post has many links to kind of great resources, including the Spinnaker and Jenkins templates that I referred to, and there's some documentation as well. I'm not sure if we shared that, but in the step functions documentation, we do cover the gradual deployments case for CLI, SAM, CFN, CloudFormation, all of those. Yeah, great. Thanks, Julian.
Cool, excellent. Yeah, so that's, slightly the wrong way around. So that's the doc links and then the blog post link.
There you go.
Yeah, just apologies. I don't know how it's actually come out in YouTube, but it looks as though the link is missing the functions at the end. So yeah, if you are reading this on the screen, add them all. Otherwise, maybe you're going to get a little bit lost. But we shall see. There we go. So yeah, just back onto the sort of life cycle as we're talking about. So exporting to infrastructure as code. Is it sort of better practice, or any thoughts about whether you have your state machines inline in your infrastructure as code or store them in a separate file? Now with versions and aliases, do you need to version control those different files or not? Or how does that then work when it sort of plugs into the versions and aliases?
I don't think you need to version. Well, you can version control those different files. I think it was in my slide deck where you would have, if you have the entire application, say a version, I think we talked about it as version 54 of the application, and your state machine version is version 6 within that application. Fine, deploy it as is. But you have a number of versions later, and let's say you have state machine version 7 in, let's say, version 64 of the app. They're separate. I mean, you don't have to continue. You don't have to keep these things in sync. It's whatever the version that you currently want to run in your application, or however you want to deploy it. Just with using that qualified ARN or that alias, just kind of include that when you're deploying. It kind of give you the ultimate flexibility.
And then I suppose sort of the next step in developing and playing with your state machine is also, if people are using SAM, and I know what's great to see CDK and Terraform support. Love Terraform with this building serverless applications, but also with SAM you've got SAM Accelerate, and SAM Accelerate allows you to really quickly iterate within the cloud. And so if you are not building in Workflow Studio and you're now sort of wanting to do things locally, as soon as you save that state machine, that's going to be automatically uploaded to the cloud. It even bypasses CloudFormation, so it's really quick. And so also that's a sort of nice way to really quickly iterate on your state machines. Just a different path if that suits you to be local.
Absolutely agree. When we did release SAM template support for this, so you should be able to define your versions and include that as well.
Okay. And then I suppose once you've then got your state machines working, what are sort of some tips and tricks you would think of for sort of evolving your state machines? So yes, we've got the versions and aliases, but how should people think about testing their step function state machines? What's the sort of life cycle of that? They've got different components, maybe they're switching a Lambda function in and out, or they are, changing an SDK call. Would your recommendation be to create a whole new version of the state machine and, redirect traffic to that, which in my mind seems to sort of logically make sense? Or are there ways that, or there ways that people should do it, I suppose, how they did it before, where they're swapping out individual parts of a state machine and testing that in isolation? I mean, any sort of thoughts or ideas on that?
Yeah, there's the way you mentioned. I think the more interesting way to do it is to create another version or publish a version, make your revisions known, keep your original version published, and let traffic roll to that. Make changes in another version. Decide if that's the way you want to go, and then either shift traffic or just remove that version, because you can kill a version as well if it's not working.
Yeah, and I suppose with Lambda, you've also got versions and aliases within Lambda as well. So you can also, deploy a new version of a Lambda function, for example, and then reference that Lambda function in your green version of your state machine 100%. And, handle that. But I think you just need to be clear in your head which version of your state machine and which version of, for example, your Lambda functions you actually are calling. Because if you've got a new version of your state machine that's calling an old, your blue version of your Lambda function, you're not then actually completely traffic shifting for what you're thinking of. So think of the bigger picture.
So make your version names descriptive.
Yes, exactly. There we go. I suppose then the other thing I was going to think about is actually something interesting. I was talking to someone at a conference recently was how they were actually using step functions for testing. And I know it's slightly on the spot. I hadn't mentioned this before, but because step functions is so awesome with the SDK integrations that you can literally call most AWS SDKs directly from step functions. You don't need a Lambda function. I think it's over 10,000 of them. It's a huge amount of things. But somebody was actually building a test running suite in step functions that, a Lambda function would write something to DynamoDB, and then, step functions in a way would assert and pull that from DynamoDB and check whether that value was valid. I just thought, wow, that's actually a whole different use case for step functions, because what is testing? You're actually doing an orchestrated test of a whole bunch of different things, and what is a good orchestrator? Is step functions. So yeah, if anybody's doing any sort of cool, weird, hacky, experimental fun using step functions as your test automation suite, yeah, I'd love to hear that.
Integration testing, let's be clear, not unit testing, right?
Yes,
yes. I would love to, aside, Julian, I'd love to talk to this customer and see what they're doing, because that's of interest to us. Integration testing and unit testing and step functions, we're researching and looking at that now. But I'd love to see how a customer is doing an integration test, and whether versions and aliases will help them run that more. Better. Sorry, ran out of words.
No, definitely. Better sounds good to me. Yeah. So any other general tips and tricks about step functions? Even it could be use case based, or how to get the most out of it. From either of you, what would you leave people with?
Trying to think of something that's recent that we want to talk about. Shiv, do you have anything? How's your mic doing?
You tell me, is it better?
My tips and tricks is don't use Shiv's system to broadcast stuff. What am I thinking about here? Any tips and tricks I want to add? I can't think of anything off the top of my head. If I come up with anything, I'll share with you, and you can share with the audience.
No, fair enough. But then, even conceptually, when people are thinking of importing step functions into their application, my colleague Ben Smith, who does a lot of stuff on step functions, I think he's either got a whole talk called this, or a part in his talk which is just step functions first. When people are talking about serverless first, he's like, hey, forget about all the other serverless stuff. Use step functions first, and only then, when you need to get out of the bounds of step functions, do you think about introducing Lambda functions into your architecture, which is a bold approach, but if you do think about it, is mind-bogglingly clever way to think about it.
It's a very commonsensical way to think about it, because you're starting from top down. If you start with your function code first and your database calls, and you're trying to orchestrate those or pull those together, kind of from a bottom up standpoint, you can do that because you're thinking about things in a detailed manner. But if you're thinking more broadly about your application design and, kind of the workflow as a programming paradigm, to say, okay, this is how I want to rough out my system, and I'll fill in the blanks later as I get more detail. It's a great way to start. And I think starting with step functions or starting with orchestration, starting with a workflow is the way to go. It enables me to kind of think about holistically what this application is supposed to be doing. And, I can fill in blanks with more detail. And I think as people, it's kind of how we discover things. We don't start at the bottom and work up. We start with a concept and work down. So I like that. Thanks for raising that, Julian.
Yeah, and I think because, application architectures, when I was alluding to earlier, talking about when you've got your business people defining a workflow that they would like to see in your business, and some builder building it for them, that is sort of closing that circle. And in a way, you're starting at that high level. It's amazing to build an application architecture that that matches your business architecture, sort of in the same tool, in the same place. In fact, we've got a love a name cheeseball for you. Step Function is my favorite AWS service. Great new features. Thanks again. Thanks for joining us via Twitch. We love to hear that.
Well, this is kind of how, sorry to interrupt, but this is kind of how top down, this is kind of how Serverless Espresso came to be, right? Ben had an idea, you had an idea, and you roughed it out with step functions and then filled it in over time. And now it's this really, really great, this great experience that customers can have in person with step functions.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing I was gonna say about one of the interesting things, even if you are talking about serverless applications, is it's interesting when we talk about sort of applications and infrastructure. And before whenever an arbitrary point in time, we think about all the infrastructure, and that may be networking or queues or things like that, and then your application code would be a separate part. But serverless is actually one of the real benefits of serverless that I hope people do realize is your actual application and your infrastructure in effect merge together. And that is incredibly powerful because you're not having to separately manage your application code and then have that shoehorned onto some kind of infrastructure that runs under the hood. And there are certain sort of constraints that come with that infrastructure, and some of that may be load balancing, some of that may be throughput, some of that may be even the fact that it's code that needs to be tested and code that needs to be worked through. If you're doing something at a really high level, as is step functions, first of all, it's a managed service. So this isn't code that you're going to have to look after on your behalf. So even if you've got a decision tree in a Lambda function, pick your language of choice. You're going to have to test those code paths. You're going to have to, go through all the failure modes of that and everything. If you can literally take that out of your Lambda function code, give it to step functions is going to run that, and it's not going to break. In fact, you don't even need to test that part of it in step functions, because step functions really is going to run that code. It's not going to break some path. There's no updating, there's no patching, there's no multi-AZ things you need to do about. There are no throughput considerations you need to think about with that. Really powerful application construct. So yeah, think of the serverless mindset as merging your application and your infrastructure together into this higher order system, and it runs as a managed service. So that's when we talk about getting rid of undifferentiated heavy lifting. This is the big one. Literally, step functions is the big one for doing that. Sorry, that was a lot of words from me. I just got overly excited.
No, I was just going to say, couldn't agree more. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, just before we say goodbye to Cory and Shiv, just talking about next week on Serverless Office Hours. Oh, that's weird. We're actually peeking partly into the dark side. If you're a Kubernetes person and you are looking at EKS or Crossplane, well, Christina's a really good guest. She's going to be talking about how you can deploy Lambda with EKS and Crossplane. So, many companies are exploring or using Kubernetes, but using Kubernetes is a bit of a control plane thing, but actually using Lambda in the data plane, this is a super interesting architectural pattern. And Christina's going to be doing that. So same place next week. I'm super looking forward to delving into all the integrations that are possible with big open source platforms like EKS and Lambda. I did mention before, but everything to do with serverless on AWS is at serverlessland.com. Tips, tricks, workshops, lots of different code, learning paths, all the kind of things. I did talk about the learning page, which has been updated recently. Lots of information over there. Please don't forget EDA Day in Nashville. It'd be lovely to see you there if you can sign up and join us in Nashville. And just back on the serverless land, patterns. Most importantly for this series, workflows, which are step functions workflows, and there's some snippets and repos. These are amazing resources, community created and generated and supported and updated. Things like workflows, where there are huge amounts of architectural patterns from beginner, advanced, different workflows, different ways you can use step functions. I keep learning more of what step functions can do from an architectural point of view by just seeing what's updated on the new workflows. So seriously, head to that link, and lots of information all about step functions over there, and you can learn even more how to do it. But thanks so much, Cory and Shiv, for joining us. Shiv, sorry your microphone was not behaving, but at least we got the lion's share of all the good information. We appreciate all the good demo work that you colleagues really appreciate it. And Cory, thanks for joining us again. And thanks for spending your time at Serverless Office Hours. We appreciate you sharing your knowledge with the community.
Thanks, Julian. And thanks, everyone online.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining us live. And if you're joining us in the recording afterwards, so glad you were able to catch up with step functions today. Thanks again to Cory and Shiv. Same time, same place next week for Serverless Office Hours. Enjoy building your service applications. Bye-bye.